The night was unnervingly quiet until a scream cut through the stillness, raw with terror, echoing like a wound tearing open the silence. Jacob, a 24-year-old man, jolted upright in his bed, sweat dripping down his neck as his eyes darted around the darkened room. His breath caught as he whispered, "That wasn't real. It couldn't be." Yet the echo of the scream lingered in his ears, sharp and undeniable. He grabbed his phone, the clock glaring 3:00 a.m., the hour everyone says is cursed. The screen flickered, a faint distortion that made his stomach twist. He froze as a faint shadow shifted near the corner, darker than the rest of the night. The air grew cold, heavy, pressing against his chest as though unseen hands clutched at him. Jacob said, "Who's there?" His voice cracked, trembling, fragile against the suffocating silence. No reply. Only the faint creak of wood as though something unseen moved closer. He reached for the bedside lamp, his fingers trembling, but the bulb only flickered and died, drowning him in darkness. A whisper, low and broken, brushed against his ear, his name, stretched out in a voice that was not his own. His heart pounded as dread clawed at him, and for the first time he realized he was not alone in the room. Jacob sat frozen, his mind racing to explain the voice. The old house creaked as if settling, but the sound was too deliberate, too close. He muttered, "Just my imagination. Just the wind." Yet the reassurance felt hollow, brittle, and false. The darkness carried weight, pressing down on him. His skin prickled as if unseen eyes traced his every movement. His hand gripped the blanket tightly, nails digging into the fabric. A faint scratching echoed against the floorboards, soft at first, then louder, more urgent. Jacob's breath hitched as he realized it was coming from under the bed. Fear rooted him still. His rational mind screamed to move, but his body betrayed him. He whispered, "Please." Not again, the words slipping before he realized he had admitted to a past fear. The scratching stopped abruptly. Silence followed, deeper and heavier than before, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Jacob closed his eyes, trying to pretend none of it was happening. The silence pressed so hard that Jacob could hear his heartbeat echo in his ears. He opened his eyes, scanning the room, each shadow stretching too long, too deep. He whispered to himself, "It's nothing. It has to be nothing." The creak of the old wooden chair near the desk shattered the silence. It rocked gently, forward then back, though no one sat in it. Jacob's throat tightened. He forced a shaky laugh. "Old house tricks," he said, but his voice sounded hollow. He stood, feet bare against the cold wood floor, and approached the chair cautiously. Every step groaned under his weight, echoing like a warning. As he reached out, the rocking stopped abruptly. His hand hovered, trembling. Then, without warning, the chair screeched against the floor, sliding backward on its own. Jacob stumbled, his chest seizing with fear as his knees buckled, barely catching himself on the desk's edge. Jacob's hand shook against the desk as he stared at the chair now still, but the mark it left on the floor showed it had moved. His breath quickened. "I'm losing my mind," he whispered, clutching the edge of the desk. A sudden knock, soft, deliberate, came from the closet door. His entire body went rigid. He glanced at the door, its handle quivering faintly, as if touched from inside. The knock came again, louder this time, making the wood vibrate. Jacob backed away slowly, whispering, "Please stop. Please." His back hit the wall, cornered, eyes locked on the trembling handle. He thought of leaving, running into the hall, but his legs felt too heavy to carry him. The silence after the knock was worse than the sound itself, as though the thing inside was waiting for him to make the first move. The silence shattered as the closet door burst open with a deafening crack, the wood groaning as it swung wide. Inside, nothing but darkness, thick and swallowing. Jacob gasped, stumbling forward onto his knees, clutching his chest as though the sound alone had ripped through him. His eyes darted to the open space, throat dry, whispering, "No." A cold draft poured out from the closet, carrying the stench of damp earth. The air grew heavier, suffocating, and in the blackness he swore he saw two faint eyes staring back at him, glowing weakly before vanishing. His body shook violently, hands scraping against the floorboards as he crawled backward. The door creaked again, slower now, closing halfway on its own. Jacob's breath came in ragged gasps, his voice barely audible as he muttered, "It wants me here. It doesn't want me to leave." Jacob woke the next morning with eyes stinging from lack of sleep, his body heavy as though the night had drained the strength from his bones. Sunlight filtered weakly through dusty blinds, but the warmth felt hollow, a poor disguise for the terror of last night. He rubbed his temples and whispered, "It was a dream, just a nightmare." Yet the words sounded empty, an excuse rather than truth. As he dressed, he noticed the chairs still slightly out of place, the closet door ajar. He froze, his stomach twisting, realizing they weren't where he left them. The memory of glowing eyes gnawed at him, lingering like a curse. He forced himself to leave the room, telling himself he needed air. But every step toward the hallway felt heavier. Shadows clung stubbornly to the corners, as if daylight could not banish them. With a deep breath he whispered, "You won't break me," though even he didn't believe his own voice. In the kitchen, Jacob brewed coffee, the hiss of the machine louder than usual in the empty silence. The bitter aroma filled the air, but it brought no comfort. He leaned on the counter, his hands shaking slightly, replaying the night's events in his head. He muttered, "I can't keep doing this," as though speaking would anchor him. The front door creaked, and his friend Eric stepped in, cheerful and oblivious. Eric said, "You look like hell, man. Rough night?" Jacob forced a hollow laugh. "You could say that." Eric eyed him suspiciously, but waved it off. The chatter was casual, yet Jacob's mind kept drifting, his eyes darting toward the hallway as if expecting shadows to spill through. The mundane setting felt like a fragile illusion, a thin veil hiding the truth of the horror waiting upstairs. Eric sat at the table, sipping his coffee, unaware of Jacob's trembling hands. "You worry too much," Eric said casually. "Old houses make noises. You're just spooking yourself." Jacob clenched his jaw, frustration simmering beneath his fear. "I know what I heard," he insisted, but his words fell heavy in the silence. Eric smirked, shaking his head. "Then prove it. Show me what's got you so scared." Jacob hesitated, his pulse quickening. The thought of going back into that room made his skin crawl, but he couldn't let Eric dismiss him. "Fine," Jacob said quietly, though his voice lacked conviction. He felt cornered, either face the terror again or be branded a fool. His chest tightened, the weight of dread pulling him down, yet something deeper, stubborn and desperate, forced him to agree. Jacob led Eric upstairs, each step groaning underfoot, the silence oppressive as the air grew colder with every step closer to the bedroom. He whispered, "You'll see." Eric chuckled, but the sound was uneasy now, quieter, as though even he sensed something was wrong. They entered the room, the chair still crooked, the closet door slightly ajar. Eric frowned, his smirk fading. "Creepy," he admitted, though he tried to sound dismissive. Jacob crossed the room, pointing at the closet. "It came from here," he said, voice tight. Eric rolled his eyes. "Closets don't scare me, man." Yet his steps slowed, hesitation betraying his words. Jacob's heart pounded as he stared at the darkened gap inside the closet, his skin crawling. The silence between them stretched thin, brittle, ready to snap at the slightest sound. The closet door shuddered faintly, as though touched from within. Eric's bravado cracked, his eyes widened as he muttered, "What the hell was that?" Jacob froze, blood draining from his face. The air turned sharp, icy, cutting through their breaths. The door creaked wider, revealing only darkness that seemed impossibly deep, like a void swallowing the light. Jacob whispered, "Do you believe me now?" His voice trembled, almost breaking. Eric stepped back instinctively, his face pale. He forced a laugh, but it wavered. "Trick of the air," he whispered, but conviction was gone. The silence that followed was thick, pressing, as if the house itself was waiting for their next move. Jacob felt the truth sink deeper. Whatever lived in that closet was real, and it was far from done with them. Jacob sat on the edge of his bed that night, exhausted but too afraid to sleep. The shadows seemed to breathe, stretching unnaturally across the walls. Eric sat nearby, fidgeting nervously, trying to mask his unease. "We're staying awake," Eric said firmly, though his voice wavered. Jacob nodded, whispering, "It doesn't want us to rest." The air grew colder, their breaths fogging faintly. The silence stretched, broken by a sudden thud above them in the attic. Both froze, eyes darting upward. Eric muttered, "Animals," but his tone lacked conviction. Jacob shook his head, his chest tightening. "It knows we're here," he whispered. Another thud followed, louder, closer, as dust drifted from the ceiling. The sound grew into slow, dragging footsteps above them, each step deliberate, each one sending terror rippling through the air. The footsteps stopped suddenly, leaving a silence so thick it roared in their ears. Eric stood, forcing bravado. "I'll check it out," he muttered, heading for the ladder to the attic. Jacob grabbed his arm, whispering, "Don't, it wants you to go up there." Eric pulled free, his jaw tight. "I'm not afraid of creaky boards," he said, though his eyes betrayed doubt. He pulled the cord, and the attic hatch creaked open, the ladder unfolding with a metallic groan. Cold air poured down, thick with dust and something sharper, rot. Jacob whispered, "Please don't," but Eric was already climbing, each step a test of courage. Jacob's stomach twisted, his fists clenched, as the ladder swayed under Eric's weight. The darkness above seemed endless, waiting to swallow him whole. Eric reached the attic, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. The light revealed dust swirling like ash, cobwebs trembling as if disturbed by unseen hands. He whispered down, "Nothing up here," but his tone cracked. Jacob called softly, "Eric, come back." Suddenly, the flashlight flickered, then steadied, illuminating a shape in the corner, vague, human-like, but impossibly still. Eric froze, breath caught in his throat. "Jacob," he whispered, his voice thin. Jacob stood below, gripping the ladder, unable to see what Eric saw, dread burning in his chest. The attic filled with an unnatural silence, heavier than before, as the shadow in the corner twitched, then slid closer, defying the beam of light. Eric stumbled backward, panic flashing across his face. Eric scrambled toward the ladder, his flashlight clattering to the floor as the shadow lunged. The beam spun wildly, slicing across the attic, catching fragments of movement, fingers too long, a face blurred and twisted. Eric shouted, "It's real!" His voice broke into a scream as he dropped down the ladder, landing hard beside Jacob. The attic hatch slammed shut above them with a deafening crack. Jacob staggered back, pulling Eric away from the ladder. Eric's chest heaved, eyes wide with terror. "It touched me," he gasped, clutching his arm. Jacob stared at him, horror gripping his heart. "I told you," Jacob whispered, his voice trembling. The silence after the slam was worse than the noise, the air now humming with something alive, something waiting. The house groaned, every board creaking as though something massive shifted within its walls. Eric backed against the wall, trembling, whispering, "I felt it grab me." Jacob's face paled as he noticed red marks forming on Eric's arm. Long finger-shaped welts burned into the skin. Jacob's stomach turned. "It's marking us," he said, his voice nearly breaking. The lights flickered violently, plunging them into momentary darkness before flaring back, dimmer than before. A shadow darted across the wall, too fast, too wrong to be human. Jacob gripped Eric's shoulder. "We can't stay here." Eric nodded, fear carving deep lines into his expression. But as they stepped toward the door, it slammed shut with violent force, trapping them inside with the unseen presence. Jacob sat on the floor, his back against the bed frame, his eyes locked on Eric's arm where the angry red welts refused to fade. The silence between them was suffocating, broken only by their ragged breathing. Eric muttered, "This isn't normal, Jacob. Something wants us here." His voice cracked with a rare vulnerability. Jacob nodded slowly, dread creeping deeper. This house. It's not random, it's tied to me, he whispered. Eric frowned, confusion mixing with fear. What do you mean? Jacob swallowed hard, his eyes distant. My family owned this place decades ago. My grandfather died here. They never told me how. The words trembled out of him, like a secret he had long avoided. The air thickened, the weight of the past pressing down, and for the first time, Jacob realized the haunting was personal. Later that night, Jacob searched through dusty boxes in the basement, desperate for answers. The air was damp, carrying the stench of mold and old wood. Eric hovered by the stairs, uneasy. Jacob whispered, "There has to be something here." His flashlight beam swept across yellowed papers and broken furniture, finally landing on an old leather-bound journal. He lifted it carefully, dust swirling into the air. Eric stepped closer, hesitant. "What is it?" Jacob flipped through fragile pages, the ink faded but legible. His breath caught as he read aloud, "The house must be kept. The debt must be paid." His hands shook, the words sinking into him like claws. Eric's face paled. "Debt? To who?" Jacob whispered back, "Not who, what?" Jacob sat hunched over the journal, flipping pages faster, his voice trembling as he read passages aloud. "The house feeds, it takes what it's owed." Eric shifted uneasily, muttering, "This is insane." Jacob snapped, his voice sharp, "You felt it grab you. Tell me that was nothing." Eric fell silent, eyes darting nervously. A sketch in the journal caught Jacob's attention, a crude drawing of a figure with hollow eyes and elongated fingers marked with words, "The Watcher." Jacob's breath hitched, his chest tightening as he whispered, "It's the same thing, the one in the attic." Eric leaned closer, his face pale. The silence deepened, heavy as stone, as if the house itself was listening to every word spoken aloud. The temperature dropped suddenly, their breath misting in the air. The journal's pages fluttered as though caught in a phantom wind, though the basement was sealed. Eric staggered back, whispering, "It doesn't want us to read it." Jacob clutched the book tighter, defiant. "It's hiding the truth," he said through clenched teeth. A hollow knock echoed against the wall, followed by a second, then a third, rhythmic, deliberate, like a heartbeat. The sound crawled through the floorboards, shaking the walls. "Ah!" Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and Jacob shouted, "Stop it!" His voice cracked, both command and plea. The journal slammed shut in his hands with a violent force, making him stumble. The silence that followed was deafening, as though the house itself had won this round. Jacob and Eric fled upstairs, slamming the basement door shut. Both leaned against it, gasping for air, their faces pale. Eric said, "This isn't just a haunting. It's something worse." Jacob's hands trembled, still clutching the journal. "It's my family," he whispered, his voice hollow. "They gave themselves to it. That's why it's here." Eric shook his head, disbelief etched in his features. "You're telling me this thing? It's a curse?" Jacob looked at him, eyes hollow with fear. "It's a bargain," he whispered. The house groaned above them, each board stretching like a body waking from slumber. For the first time, Jacob realized he wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting against something his own blood had bound him to. Jacob sat with the journal open on the living room table, his hands trembling as he turned the brittle pages. Eric leaned over his shoulder, pale and tense. The words on the page bled with dreadful clarity. The bloodline must renew the pact. Jacob's throat tightened as he whispered, "It's me. I'm the debt." Eric recoiled, shaking his head. "That's insane. You didn't choose this." Jacob looked up, his eyes hollow. "My family did, and it doesn't care if I agreed." A draft swept through the room, carrying the faint sound of a child's laughter, brittle and broken. The lights dimmed, shadows stretching into grotesque shapes along the walls. Eric whispered, "It wants you." Jacob clenched his fists, his breath shallow. "No," he muttered, his voice cracking. "It wants more than me. The journal's next page revealed names scrawled in faded ink, family members listed like offerings. Jacob ran his finger down the page, stopping at his own name, written faintly but undeniably. His stomach dropped, bile rising. "It knew me before I was born," he whispered. Eric's face twisted, fear etched deep. "This thing's been waiting for you," he muttered, stepping back. Jacob slammed the book shut, trembling. "I'm not giving it what it wants," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. A sudden bang rattled the windows, glass trembling in the frames. The house groaned, each wall straining as if alive. A whisper crawled through the air, low and guttural. "You cannot deny me." Jacob staggered back, clutching his head, the voice ringing inside his skull like nails scraping against bone. Eric grabbed Jacob's arm, pulling him toward the hallway. "We need to get out now," he said desperately. Jacob shook his head, panicked. "It won't let us. You saw what it did to the door." As if in answer, the front door slammed shut with a violent crash, locks clicking on their own. Eric cursed under his breath, pulling harder. "We can't just sit here." Jacob's chest heaved as he stared at the shadows twisting along the walls, forming grotesque shapes. "It doesn't want us gone. It wants to finish what was started." The air grew colder, lights flickering. Eric muttered, "Then we fight it." Jacob's voice cracked. "Fight what we can't even see." A hollow laugh echoed in the distance, mocking them both. Jacob clutched the journal tightly, his knuckles white, and whispered, "It's not just the house. It's bound to me." Eric's jaw tightened. "Then we cut the tie," he said, grabbing the book. The moment his hand touched it, the lights exploded, plunging them into darkness. A piercing scream erupted from nowhere, rattling every bone in their bodies. Jacob screamed, "Let go," but Eric held on, defiant. The journal's cover burned with a faint red glow, smoke rising from its pages. Eric shouted, "We can destroy it." Jacob's eyes widened, horror consuming him. "No, you'll kill yourself." A shadow surged from the walls, slamming into them, knocking them both to the floor. The journal flew open, pages fluttering violently as though alive, ink bleeding across the paper. The journal's pages twisted and folded, forming words that glowed faintly. "One must remain." Jacob's breath caught, his heart pounding like a drum. He stared at Eric, realization dawning. "It doesn't just want me," he whispered. "It wants a sacrifice." Eric froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't mean..." Jacob's voice broke. "It won't stop until it takes someone." The house trembled, dust falling from the ceiling, the shadows pressing closer. Eric clenched his fists, rage and fear colliding in his expression. "Then let it take me," he muttered. Jacob shook his head violently, tears welling. "No, you don't understand. It won't end there. It will never stop." The shadows curled closer, the voice whispering, "Choose." The journal slammed shut on its own, the room trembling as a deep growl reverberated through the walls. Jacob clutched his chest, gasping as the lights flickered violently overhead. Eric grabbed his arm, shouting, "It's forcing us to choose." Jacob's voice cracked with desperation. "We won't give it what it wants." The shadows thickened, crawling up the walls like black vines, merging into a towering shape with hollow eyes. The temperature plummeted, frost forming across the windows. Jacob whispered, "The Watcher." The figure leaned forward, its voice a guttural rumble inside their skulls. "Blood binds. Blood pays." Jacob staggered back, his entire body trembling. Eric stepped forward, defiant but pale. "You'll have to take both of us," he spat, though fear trembled behind his bravado. The Watcher stretched its fingers, impossibly long and skeletal, as the air grew heavy, pressing on their chests. Jacob gasped, his knees buckling, while Eric struggled to stand his ground. Jacob shouted, "It's feeding on us." Eric grabbed Jacob's arm, pulling him upright. "Then fight it." Jacob's eyes darted to the journal on the floor, its pages glowing faint red. He whispered, "It's bound to this. If we break it..." A deafening roar cut him off, rattling the windows as the figure surged forward, shadows lashing out like whips. Eric shoved Jacob aside, taking the brunt of the impact, slamming into the wall. His cry of pain echoed, raw and human, against the monster's inhuman growl. Jacob scrambled for the journal, his hands shaking as he flipped it open. Pages writhed like living skin, words glowing, reshaping into commands. Offer or perish. His heart pounded as he whispered, "It's demanding the sacrifice now." Eric staggered up, clutching his ribs, his voice hoarse. "Then give it me." Jacob's eyes filled with tears. "No, that's what it wants, you don't understand." The Watcher loomed closer, its hollow gaze fixed on them both, the air vibrating with its hunger. Jacob slammed the journal shut, his voice cracking. "You'll get nothing." The entity screamed, the sound shattering glass, books tumbling from shelves. Jacob's ears bled from the force, but he stood firm, clutching the cursed book to his chest like a shield. The Watcher's form convulsed, splitting into writhing tendrils that lashed at the walls, gouging deep marks into wood and plaster. Jacob shouted over the chaos, "It's bound to the pact. If I break it, it loses power." Eric crawled toward him, shouting, "Then do it." Jacob dropped to his knees, flipping open the journal. His hands bled as he tore at the glowing pages, ripping them free. The house shook violently, the ceiling cracking as dust poured down. The entity shrieked, its hollow eyes blazing. One tendril whipped toward Jacob, but Eric threw himself in the way, screaming as it struck him across the chest, leaving searing burns. Jacob cried out, his tears mixing with blood. "Don't you die on me." Jacob screamed, tearing the final glowing page free. The journal erupted in a violent blaze, crimson flames consuming it, though no heat touched him. The Watcher convulsed, its form fracturing into shards of shadow, shrieking like broken glass. The walls rattled, pictures falling and shattering on the floor. Eric collapsed beside Jacob, gasping in pain, his voice faint. "Did we win?" Jacob's chest heaved, tears streaming as he clutched his friend's shoulder. "I don't know," he whispered. The entity shrank back, dissolving into a cloud of black ash that swirled upward, sucked into the cracks of the ceiling. The silence afterward was unbearable, too heavy, too final. Jacob dropped the smoldering journal remains, staring into the void where the monster had stood, knowing it wasn't over. Jacob and Eric sat slumped against the wall, their bodies trembling, the room eerily quiet after the chaos. Dust still floated in the air, glowing faintly in the weak light of the shattered lamp. Eric coughed, his voice hoarse. "It's gone, isn't it?" Jacob glanced at the blackened ashes of the journal, his hands shaking. "I don't know," he whispered. The silence carried weight, pressing on them both, as though the house was listening. Jacob's eyes scanned the corners of the room, every shadow a threat. Eric muttered, "I can't stay here another second." Jacob nodded, though his gut twisted with doubt. He whispered, "If it's tied to me, leaving won't matter." The words hung in the air, like a curse neither of them wanted to face. They stumbled outside into the night air, the sky heavy with clouds, the wind cold against their faces. Eric leaned heavily on Jacob, his breaths shallow. "Fresh air," Eric whispered, though his voice trembled. Jacob's eyes lingered on the house behind them, its windows dark but watchful, like hollow eyes staring back. "It feels like it's still alive," he muttered. Eric shook his head weakly. "We burned it. We ended it." Jacob wanted to believe, but unease clung to him like frost. The silence of the night was unnatural, no crickets, no wind in the trees, just emptiness. He whispered, "It's waiting." Eric glanced at him, fear flickering in his eyes. For the first time, Jacob wondered if the house had truly let them leave, or if it had only given them the illusion of freedom. They reached Jacob's car, parked on the overgrown driveway. Jacob opened the door, helping Eric into the passenger seat. His friend groaned, clutching his chest. "You drive," Eric whispered. Jacob hesitated, staring at the steering wheel, his hands trembling. As he slid into the seat, the radio flickered on by itself, static crackling through the speakers. Jacob froze, his blood running cold. The static warped, twisting into a voice that rasped, "Not done." Jacob's eyes widened, his breath caught in his throat. Eric leaned forward weakly. "Tell me that was just the radio," he whispered. Jacob's hand slammed the radio off, his chest heaving. "Don't listen," he muttered, though his own voice shook. The silence that followed felt like a lie. Jacob drove down the road, hands gripping the wheel tightly. The forest loomed on either side, branches twisting overhead. Eric closed his eyes, whispering, "We're leaving it behind." But Jacob's chest tightened as he glanced in the rearview mirror. His heart nearly stopped. The house was gone, replaced by endless trees, yet in the reflection he saw a shadow sitting in the back seat. Its hollow eyes burned faintly, locked on him. Jacob gripped the wheel harder, forcing himself not to look back. Sweat poured down his face as he whispered, "Don't turn around." Eric stirred, confused, opening his eyes. "What? No." Jacob's voice cracked. "It's with us." The air in the car turned frigid, every breath a ghost in the dark. The car's engine sputtered, headlights flickering as the road stretched endlessly before them. Jacob's voice broke into a whisper. "It never wanted the house, it wanted us." Eric turned his head, eyes widening as the shadow leaned closer from the back seat, its whisper curling like smoke. "You were never meant to leave." Jacob slammed his foot on the gas, the engine roaring, but the road seemed to stretch forever, trees blurring into darkness. Eric screamed, clutching Jacob's arm, "It's not letting us go." Jacob's tears streamed as he choked out, "Then we fight until the end." The car shook violently, lights flickering, as the shadow's hollow face loomed between them. The story closed in silence, broken only by the faint echo of laughter, high, brittle, and endless.